Namaskar and welcome to Diplomatic Dispatch, the show that brings you expert analysis of all the major happenings on the international front. I'm your host, Vikas Swarup. Our focus today will be on the 20th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. The 20th CPC National Congress began in Beijing from October 16 and concluded on October 23rd. This event, which takes place once every 5 years, defines the political institutional character of the Chinese Communist Party due to its monopoly of Chinese politics. It assesses the achievements made since the last Congress and sets the agenda and leadership of the party for the next 5 years. This was the first CPC since the COVID-19 pandemic began and took place against the backdrop of the continuing very strict zero COVID policy, which has placed large parts of China under a lockdown, an underperforming economy, stock market crashes, and a property market slump. Former leader Deng Xiaoping had left the legacy that CCP general secretaries would step down after serving 2 5-year terms. But for the first time in more than 30 years, the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party elected Xi Jinping as its general secretary for a precedent-breaking 3rd 5-year term, tilting the country decisively back towards one-man rule after decades of power sharing among its elites. This could effectively allow him to remain in power for life, given that in 2018 he had dispensed with the term limit of 2 terms or 10 years. He also retained his role as chair of the Military Commission, controlling the People's Liberation Army, and is all but certain to be reappointed president in March next year, thus signaling Xi's successful and overwhelming consolidation of power in Beijing. He was also successful in removing all his rivals and packing China's most powerful political body, the 7-member Politburo Standing Committee, with his key loyalists, even replacing Premier Li Keqiang. So what do these developments mean for China, for the world, and for India? To discuss all this, I have with me 2 superb China experts. Ambassador Ashok Kantha is a distinguished fellow at Vivekananda International Foundation. He was Ambassador of India to China until January 2016. Prior to this, he was Secretary East at the Ministry of External Affairs. His previous assignments include High Commissioner of India to Sri Lanka and Malaysia, Consul General in Hong Kong, and Joint Secretary East Asia at MEA. Professor Alka Acharya is Professor of Chinese Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. She is also the Honorary Director of the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi, has edited and authored books on India and China. She has most recently edited a volume, Boundaries and Borderlands, 100 years after the 1914 Simla Convention. A very warm welcome to both of you. Let me begin with you, Professor Acharya. How do you assess the 20th CPC? Was it indeed a decisive break from the past?
As you yourself said in your introductory remarks, that this Congress broke with the precedent that had been set around the turn of the century by Deng Xiaoping. He had a series of administrative and political reforms which affected the government and the party. And it was then that it was decided to have 2 terms for the General Secretary and President. So clearly, if a decisive break has happened, it is a decisive break with the past 20 years. Before that, we did see that one-man rule in China, obviously Mao Zedong. He's the largest serving single leadership-dominated system. So yes, the 20th Party Congress is a decisive break in the sense that we do not now have the precedents of Deng Xiaoping's reforms. To what extent will Xi Jinping be able to exercise complete domination remains to be seen. The party is, while it obviously works under the leadership of the man at the top, has nonetheless a great many levels at which different groups, different factions operate. And it may not be easy for Xi Jinping to completely dominate the show because China is too large, too complex, and too multi-layered So 20th Party Congress is a break. It remains to be seen how much this man can completely dominate the show.
Ambassador Kant, take us through the composition of the new Politburo Standing Committee. Who's in and who's out? After all, this is the most important and most politically significant body of the Chinese Communist Party.
You know, the defining characteristic of the new leadership lineup, which emerged on 23rd October, is the dominance of Xi Jinping. While what Alka said is correct, that no one person can completely dominate a country as large as China, but there was a clear departure in this Politburo Standing Committee compared to the previous two Congresses, 18th Party Congress in 2012 and 19th Party Congress in 2017. In those two Congresses, a modicum of balance was maintained in composition of Politburo Standing Committee. That was completely jettisoned by Xi Jinping when it comes to 20th Party Congress. All 7 members of the Politburo Standing Committee, including Xi Jinping himself, it's packed with Xi Jinping loyalists, as you put in your introductory remarks. You know, there was this unwritten rule earlier that what was said, 7 up, 8 down. That means if you're 6, 7 and below, you will be retained in Politburo Standing Committee. If you're 68 and above, you'll have to exit. This rule was also jettisoned. So you have very significant omissions and additions in the new leadership lineup. Premier Li Keqiang and 4th ranking member in party hierarchy, Wang Yang, who were 67, they have been retired, not only from Politburo, but they're not even member of Central Committee of the CPC. 2 members who have been retained, they are, Chao Le-chi and Wang Huning. Both are close allies of Xi Jinping. 4 new members have been added to Politburo Standing Committee. All are seen to be closely allied with Xi Jinping, including 3 of them who had worked with virtual chief of staff to Xi Jinping in different capacities. Li Qiang, who is the number 2 leader in Politburo Standing Committee hierarchy. Then you have Cai Chi, who was earlier party secretary of Beijing, and Ding Xuexiang. All 3 of them have worked directly with Xi Jinping earlier in de facto chief of staff capacities in different incarnations. The 4th member who's there, who has been inducted now, Li Xing, who was party secretary of Guangdong, is again very closely allied with Xi Jinping. It's widely anticipated that number 2 in the hierarchy, new hierarchy, Li Qiang, will become Premier of the State Council when National People's Congress is convened in March next year. Now, Li Qiang, unlike his predecessors in the job as Premier, has no experience in the central government. In fact, this will be for the first time since Zhou Enlai, you'll have such a situation taking place. But he is seen to be close to Xi Jinping, so loyalty trumps everything else. So you have this fact we have to bear in mind. Second factor which is important when it comes to new leadership lineup is that once again, like in 2017, there is no successor. If you look at the age and experience of other 6 members of Politburo Standing Committee, none of them really qualifies to replace Xi Jinping in 2027, when 21st Party Congress will take place. So in a way, Xi Jinping is indicating that he will continue beyond 3rd term.
Following on from what Ambassador Kant just said, the fact that, for the first time since 1997, the CPC has revealed an all-male Politburo. So, Professor Acharya, will women be pushed even further from power under Xi Jinping?
That has really been one of the most disappointing aspects of the leadership of the Communist Party, which came out from a framework where Mao had described women as holding up half the sky.
Half the sky.
And women, as a consequence of the revolution, much like in India, also came out of the houses for the first time. The societal dynamics were being shaped very actively by women. Now, the political theater is one which is being completely dominated by men, and that's a really unfortunate development, given the fact that it will buttress a certain kind of patriarchy, it will buttress a certain kind of arrogance within these structures, and there will be no alleviating factor, as it were. On the other hand, we have groups, women's groups, who have also been trying to make their own space in social economic spheres, and it's very proudly touted that if you look at the startups that have taken place in China for the last decade, or women entrepreneurs, they far outnumber the men. It's also stated that in the newer emerging sectors, women are getting more employment than men. So they try to sort of balance it out. But where it really matters, where the power centers are, where the corridors of power are, there women are unfortunately. And this is not going to be very good in an overall sense for social dynamics.
Ambassador Kant, what does this unprecedented concentration of power in the hands of one leader, Xi Jinping, mean for China? Is he now on par with Mao?
Well, I will not come to the conclusion that Xi Jinping is on par with Mao. No, Mao Zedong was the founder of People's Republic of China. He led the struggle for liberation. He was the supreme leader of China until 1976, from 1949. In terms of legacy as well, despite his mixed record, several major mistakes made by him, he is still considered the most important leader of China. I think Xi Jinping will take some time before reaches that level. Having said that, one must acknowledge that today Xi Jinping concentrates political power in a manner which has not been witnessed in post-Mao China. At the same time, I will say that what we saw at 20th Party Congress was more about continuity than change. Basic directions of China's policies, whether domestic or external, have already been laid down during first 10 years of Xi Jinping. He has moved away quite decisively from the legacy of Deng Xiaoping. We discussed some areas like politically, he has jettisoned collective leadership. He has moved towards a personality cult once again. In terms of ideology, China is once again back as a highly ideology-oriented party state, which wasn't the case earlier. In terms of Chinese economic policy, we have a situation now where politics trumps economy, which was quite different from what we had under Xi Jinping, under Deng Xiaoping. Xi Jinping prioritizes security and stability over economic growth. Xi Jinping lays emphasis on state-led economic growth rather than preponderance or preeminence of private sector, which was the case earlier. In terms of foreign policy, clearly the earlier era of biding your time is well behind China. China is pursuing a policy which is assertive in nature. China's emergence as a preeminent power in the world, displacing the USA. So it's a very different China we are looking at today. But this is not something which has surfaced at 20th Party Congress. These are trends we are witnessing for some time, and these trends will continue. Indeed, they have been reinforced at the 20th Party Congress.
Point which is somewhat different from what Ambassador Kant said. You see, this thing about ideology trumping economics, or ideology trumping all other things. Look, if you take right from Mao onwards, and even Deng Xiaoping, ideology was never, ever out of the picture. Even with Deng, who's opened up China to the entire world, who brought in foreign capital, who relaxed rules, he never changed fundamentally the nature of the state, or the nature of state and party control over the economy. And that is something that we must acknowledge, that all that we see Xi Jinping doing now is reasserting ideology in a different way. But ideology would still be prime. I don't think we can get away from the fact that Xi Jinping's challenges, particularly from the United States, Tang opened up, America was in love with China. And they went in droves, not because they wanted to help China get out of its communist kind of straitjacket. They were making money over there.
Exactly.
Xi Jinping is now facing an America which is determined now to stymie its rise. So ideology will never get out of the picture.
But the markets reacted very badly to the power grab by Xi Jinping. Chinese stocks sank the most since 2008 in Hong Kong, and the yuan fell to a 14-year low amid concerns that Xi Jinping's increased dominance over the nation's top political bodies will be detrimental to the economy and private enterprise. So how do you assess this impact on the Chinese economy and on the world economy?
See, to begin with, I really would not get too excited about stocks, market signals. They go up and they go down in response to just about any kind of major development, which is outside the bounds of expectation. So if they have crashed and tanked today, they will rise up again tomorrow when China unveils some new plan. Similarly, the fall in the yuan rate. I think what is happening is that this is the Western capitalist world's reaction to something which was expected, but which they find difficult to digest. Now, what is going to happen to the economy? Of course, there are huge challenges. And I'm not an economist, but what I find is that for every two pieces that are talking about the doom of the Chinese economy, dire prognostications, there are two pieces which say that all is well. So I think somewhere we need to take a balanced view. For instance, the pandemic is the immediate context in which we are looking at what is happening with the economy. And the biggest challenge is the continuation of the zero COVID policy, which is having a huge impact. And the other thing is, of course, the two main problems in the Chinese economy is the property bubble. Now, on both those counts, Xi Jinping is going to have a major challenge on his hands. But if you look at other fundamentals of the economy, they seem to be doing well. Manufacturing, the Chinese are still way ahead. I mean, Germany, Japan, and India together can't match up to China's manufacturing capacities. They have brought about some very significant changes in their tax system. They are obviously now putting all their eggs, or at least a major part of their eggs, towards innovation, knowledge economy. So they are cognizant of the challenges, and I think they will devise ways and means to respond to it.
Ambassador Kantha, now the CPC came amidst the Russian war in Ukraine and follows the big recent military exercises and tensions over Taiwan, and worries about Xi Jinping's plans to either annex or reunify Taiwan. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has warned that China has accelerated its plans to take over Taiwan, while the US Navy chief has warned that it could be as early as next year. Will a third term make Xi Jinping more assertive, particularly in terms of his foreign policy moves?
No, my own reading is that the third term will not involve a departure or course correction compared to policies Xi Jinping has been pursuing externally. What we have to bear in mind that China has been, fairly assertive in terms of a pursuit of its so-called core interests, including its contested territorial claims in various theaters, Taiwan, South China Sea, East China Sea, and along India-China borders. I think that trend will continue. At the same time, we have to recognize the fact that China is today facing serious headwinds, both geopolitically and economically. Geopolitically, post-Ukraine war, there has been a sharper, stronger pushback from Western countries led by the USA against China. You have to look at various indicators, including the recent national security strategy of President Biden, or very stringent restrictions imposed by the US administration on supply of semiconductors and the relevant equipment and technology to China. These are major steps. USA is trying not only to maintain its edge over China, but it's trying to slow down Chinese economy. And in Europe also, there has been a very significant change in perception vis-a-vis China. Though in global South, China is still maintaining, it's maintaining ground. It has not lost ground. Economically, while I agree with Alka that we are not moving towards any kind of doomsday scenario when it comes to Chinese economy, but we are shifting towards a relatively low growth rate trajectory for China. And this will not only be this year. This year, according to World Bank, Chinese GDP will grow at 2.8% as compared to target of about 5.5%. I suspect, given nature of problems China faces today, including zero COVID policy, which has been fairly disastrous, China is likely to reach a relatively lower level of economic growth in terms of GDP output. How that will impact China's external behavior remains to be seen.
Professor Acharya, picking up on that word course correction. Now, a feature of Xi's rule has been to persist with policies regardless of the blowback, whether it is concerning its economy, Taiwan, the South China Sea, or zero COVID. Do you think this might change now that he has secured his all-important third term?
No, I think I'll go along with Ambassador Kant's perspective that we are not going to see any major shift, right? Now, when we say that he has persisted despite blowback, let's take the case of zero COVID. And I think that somewhere on balance, the policy may be seen as having economically disastrous effect, but their plank has been that this has been an approach that has saved lives. They constantly compare it with the kind of wholesale deaths that occurred in the United States, for instance, and the fact that they were able to save lives. And then there are, of course, packages which they are. So that is going to be their plank of continuing with zero COVID. Now, the other thing is that given the nature of the population, the size of the population, a major pandemic rampaging through the society would leave their, it would leave them in utter chaos. So in some ways, one has to see the reasons why they have gone in for a zero COVID. It's a hugely populous country. Similarly, now this is, of course, as far as domestic is concerned, and I would say that I have noticed that they have always been pretty flexible when it comes to economic adjustments. Okay? Foreign policy realm is different. There has been a very consistent stand. South China Seas, they're not going to budge. They're constantly moving towards more multilateral discussions. Taiwan is a different ball game because that they see as, if anything, their last bastion for exercising national reunification option. And I don't see any change there as well. They have consistently said that they reserve the right to use force. But I don't see them attacking Taiwan. There's only one scenario in which they will be compelled, which is when Taiwanese declare independence or are pushed to declare. Otherwise, they're not going to, they'll react very strongly against what the Americans are doing. That's their style. But I don't see them falling to that gambit.
Ambassador Kant, now for India, this was an important Congress to watch as it came amidst the LAC standoff. And although Xi Jinping has said that he wanted to build closer ties with the neighborhood, the event began with a video clip of the clashes in Galwan in 2020, and the PLA commander at Galwan, Shi Fabao, was among the 2,296 CPC delegates present. So what should we expect from Xi Jinping in terms of India-China relations?
As you mentioned, there was some signaling during the party congress, including, clip of Galwan clashes being included in the video on achievements of Xi Jinping during last 10 years. The fact that Xi Fabao was one of the delegates to party congress, repeated references to sovereignty, the fact that the composition of the PLA leadership emerging out of party congress includes many people who were earlier deployed in leadership positions along the Western theatre, which deals with India borders. I think these signals lead us to come to the conclusion that we should not expect any flexibility on part of China when it comes to dealing with outstanding border-related issues. So the present difficulties we're facing in Eastern Ladakh or elsewhere along India-China borders will continue. At the same time, one needs to look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that today, the defining characteristic of global landscape is escalating strategic rivalry and competition between the USA and China. And this is something which was acknowledged indirectly by Xi Jinping, though he didn't specifically refer to USA, but he made several references to hegemony and efforts by certain countries to blackmail and contain China. Clearly, he had USA in mind. He also reiterated the Chinese objective of asserting its leadership role in the region and globally. I referred earlier to President Biden's national security strategy and other measures taken by US administration and what they mean. So we have this situation which will be the prism through which China will increasingly look at its relations with other countries, including with India. Given that background, there is a possibility that there might be some tactical adjustment by China in its dealings with India. We have already seen references in China's strategic literature to India's independent foreign policy in context of the war in Ukraine. But to my mind, these changes or adjustments will be tactical in nature.
For Xi Jinping now, it is the United States and the United States alone which is going to be the most serious challenger, security threat, and the power that can actually prevent or stall. It cannot make it go away, but it can stall. So for him, that is the major problem. And therefore, this bit about how they are going to view India, I agree, there could be tactical shifts, but we should at least try and see these clips that were shown, not seen as a signal to India. This was a party for the people. I mean, this was a Congress for the party and for the people and for the army. And they projected a message of nationalism.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Kantha and Professor Alka Acharya, for your illuminating insights into the nature of modern China. China makes up nearly a fifth of global GDP today. As the 20th CPC is done and dusted, and China embarks on a new journey under an unchallenged supreme leader, the world and India will have to monitor closely and recalibrate their own approaches. Thank you for watching Diplomatic Dispatch. Till we meet again, take care and goodbye.